Elijah. While he was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud a voice said, "This is my Son, the Beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell to the ground and were overcome by fear. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Get up and do not be afraid." And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus ordered them, "Tell no one about the vision until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
Today is known as Transfiguration Sunday in the church. Every year before we begin the Lenten season, which will begin with our Ash Wednesday service on Wednesday night, we stop and remember this very, very unique story. There's never been an event like this at any other time in history before or after Christ, that heaven literally touched the earth. This opening up. And we have this account because we have an eyewitness writing in our first lesson that Keith read for us from 2 Peter. Peter was one of the three that was present for the Transfiguration. And he put it well that it's not some cleverly crafted myth that we tell you. No, it's not a creation of humans, but rather it's the experience of the holy and the power of God in these sacred moments that God revealed who Jesus was. Those who stood with him was the greatest lawgiver of all time, Moses, and the greatest prophet, Elijah. And if you notice in the Bible, time and time again, when they go up a mountain, something special is about to happen. You know, maybe the three got a hint while they were going up. I don't know. We don't know what they were thinking. But remember Abraham, for example, with Isaac, when he was challenged to sacrifice his own son, but God showed how he provided? That was up on a mountain. When Moses went up on the mountain for all those days to receive the 10 Commandments, it was above and up that he went to experience that law. And then there was Elijah. It was up the mountain that he defeated the prophets of Baal and showed the power of God. It was later in Elijah's life that he went up the mountain and God spoke to him, not in a flood or an earthquake or a fire, but by a still, small voice. Even the temple itself is built on a mount. Something about being up or above reminded the ancients that God was with them and they were near the presence of God. Now, going up a mountain doesn't guarantee you the holy. Maybe you've been up a few mountains and you didn't find anything holy up there. Any more than coming to church guarantees that you're going to experience the holy. But it's more apt to happen here than any other place. As we focus our hearts and minds on the body and blood of Christ, on the cross, on the Word of God, as we come to pray together, it's more apt to happen here than anywhere else. It's not guaranteed, but we're positioning ourselves. Just as Jesus positioned his 3 select disciples of John, James, and Peter, Peter who would become the rock of the church, Peter that would stand and preach at Pentecost, to experience the holy. William Temple is one of the great saints of the 20th century. He was the Archbishop of Canterbury during the most terrible days of the Second World War. And he shared with Churchill and very few others the voice that gave the English people the courage they needed to survive. And I love how Temple defined worship. He said, worship is our submission of our very nature to God. It's the quickening of our consciousness by his holiness, the nourishment of our mind by his truth, the purifying of our imagination by his beauty, and the enlarging of our hearts by love. That's what we hope happens in a worship service as we come to experience the holy. And notice the word is experience. Going back to our 2 Peter lesson again, we have the prophetic word made more sure. Now, they had grown up with the prophets. This crowd of disciples had heard the prophets all their lives. They had been inspired by John the Baptist, a current prophet in their time. They were following Jesus. But now that God opened the very curtains to heaven, and heaven literally touched the earth, they experienced it in a new way. What we make ours, what we experience, not some myth, but a reality, becomes that which empowers our faith. This week has been a hard week for our church. We had 3 services of celebrations of lives, a memorial, and I got word this morning, I haven't been able to tell the person doing the pastoral prayer, that Don Burdue of our church died just a few moments ago. Saw Don yesterday and knew it was close. But how do we prepare for those kind of moments? We do it ahead of time by experiencing the holy. And what we experience and make ours will get us through life and give us the strength that we need when we make it real. Listen again to 2 Peter, as Simon Peter writes. Pay attention to it like a lamp burning in a dark place until the day dawns and the morning star comes to your heart. That's the power of experience and then living out of that experience. I'm reminded of a story of a man that had a job as a magician on a cruise ship. I don't know if it's a Caribbean princess or not, but some kind of cruise ship, I hope not, made it back to port someday, I guess. But this ship had a terrible disaster. But now, earlier, when every time he would do a show, the captain's parrot would come and say, "He's a fake. It's not magic. He's a fake. He's a fake." Until one day the ship went down. And somehow that parrot and magician ended up in the same lifeboat. Parrot looked around, said, "I give up. What'd you do with the boat?" You know, it's one thing to say it's magic. It's another thing to know and understand when life is real and we experience it. Now, Simon Peter had seen Jesus feed thousands. He had seen Jesus still storms. He had seen Jesus walk across the water. He had seen the blind see and the lame walked. But now, as he experienced the very holiness of Jesus, and endorsed by Moses and Elijah and God himself as he spoke, he was ready for something greater. He was ready to sit at the upper room. He was ready to see the crucifixion and the resurrection and stand at Pentecost and preach to thousands and be the rock on which the church was built because he experienced it. Folks, the challenge for us is not come just to admire God, but to be changed by God. The challenge for us is not just to have a good hour in church, but to have an hour that gives us a new sense of peace and a new sense of power. For Peter was right again when he wrote in our opening verses, when he said, "No prophecy comes by human interpretation." Now, we have to interpret from the Greek to the English. We have to interpret from the Hebrew to the English. I know we have to interpret from one culture to another culture because our culture changes so much. But the truth of God is not for us to make it convenient or easy or not challenging, but to let it take us and empower and change us the way God would have us to be. For you see, the challenge is for God to open the door and for us to take the leap of faith. For us to be able to take what we say we believe, that it's no longer merely a creed, but is a deed. No longer some analytical thing that we have learned, but a love that we have learned to live. Then we too can know of the holiness of God. Got a story yesterday that I want to share with you that shows the importance of showing our faith. This man was driving in his car and he saw the light turn yellow and he didn't want to be guilty of running the red light, so he stopped on yellow. The car right behind him, wanting to make the light, had to slam on her brakes, dropped her cell phone, her makeup, maybe her coffee too, and she began to just curse that driver all she could until a big policeman came and tapped on her window. He said, "Ma'am, get out of your car." And she wasn't sure what to do, but she got out. He said, "Turn around." He put handcuffs on her, took her over to his car, said, "You're under arrest." She said, "What? You're under arrest? We're taking you to the police station." Took her in and fingerprinted her and photographed her, put her back in the holding room. About 2 hours later, they came and got her. Took her back to where she had entered the station and said, "We're so sorry. We have made a terrible mistake. But when I saw you flipping the other car, cursing like a sailor, I just knew when I looked at that bumper sticker on your car that said, 'What would Jesus do?' and I saw that tag that said 'Right to Life,' and saw that nice chrome fish on the back of your car and another bumper sticker that said, 'Follow me to Sunday school,' that had to be a stolen car." See, it's not just a matter of knowing our faith, it's living our faith. And once we've experienced it, like the disciples at Transfiguration, I don't care how you explain that story. It's when you sense the holy that you're changed. Fred Craddock, a great preacher who came out of a tradition that doesn't baptize infants, was asked one time if he believed in baptizing infants. I love his answer. He said, "Believe in it? Heck, I've even seen it." When we experience the holy, it becomes ours. My mother had a favorite poem she taught me early in my childhood. Many of you would know Edgar Guest's poem. It said, "I'd rather see a sermon than hear one any day. I'd rather one walk with me than merely tell the way." The eye is a better pupil and much clearer than the ear. For fine counseling can be confusion, but the example is always clear. And the greatest of preachers are those who live their creeds. For what everyone wants to see is good deeds. To be able to experience the holy and live out of the holy and draw others to the holy